suburb, Burnside Heights. Creedy's just let us know she's coming in from as well. So I'm going to close the chat box now and present for you. So here we are. We're going to talk a little bit about foster care tonight. So hopefully that's what you have come here expecting to do. So I'll just see if I can move along in my presentation. Before we talk any information, I really just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on tonight. And excitingly enough, there will be a number of different traditional custodians represented because we're coming in from all over Melbourne. So I just want to acknowledge all of those traditional custodians and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging all across Melbourne. So a little bit of some introductions and housekeeping for this evening. So my name is Hannah and I'm the Carer Practice Manager here at Victoria, and I am going to lead you through this presentation this evening. And I'm lucky to have a trusty sidekick with me, Louise. I'll just get Lou to come on and say hi.
Hi everyone, good evening. Welcome to our webinar. As Hannah said, I'm Lou. I'm the Care Engagement Officer here at Life Without Barriers in Victoria. So I manage initially all inquiries, your paperwork, training. So if any of you wish to press the link at the end of tonight's session, it'll probably be me that will talk you through the next part of the process.
Thanks, Lou. And so my role, Lou really manages all of the inquiries and she does a phenomenal job of it. We're very lucky to have her. And I manage the carer recruitment and assessment team here across Victoria. So all of this kind of frontline activity, inquiries, training, and then through to assessment and accreditation as well. So all the really exciting stuff. So that's us. We're here with you this evening to answer any questions you might have and lead you through this presentation. I would just like to do a few little housekeeping bits here. So if you do have questions throughout the presentation, what we'd really love you to do is write them in the chat box. To keep the flow kind of going this evening, I won't come to each question as you write it in, but what I'll do is there'll be space at the end of the presentation where I'll come and Lou will make sure she feeds me any of those questions that are sitting in the chat box that haven't been answered yet. So please, if you think of questions as I'm talking, do write them in the chat box. A little note on that though, we really want to respect your privacy and confidentiality. So if you have really personal or very specific questions about things about your family or household or whatnot, we can always speak with you privately. So you don't need to be popping it in the chat box this evening. So feel free to make that discretionary call about what you'd like to share. So without further ado, let's get started and start hopefully walking you through some information that will really help you make a decision about whether fostering is right for you. Really, the way we've structured this presentation is that we've heard the same questions time and time again from lots of different people. So we've structured this presentation to kind of try and answer some of those questions that people frequently present with. So there's a number of things that we're going to cover this evening. Lots of them. I promise it won't take too long though. So firstly, we're going to talk a little bit about Life Without Barriers, which is the agency that we work for. And I might slip up and call them LWB throughout the presentation. Life Without Barriers, LWB, same thing. We're going to talk a little bit about what foster care actually is. So that's important for you to know if you're considering being a foster carer. We're going to talk about where more foster carers are needed. Hint, it's everywhere. We'll talk about the different care types. There are different types of care and some of them work better with different types of lifestyle and whatnot. So it's important you understand those. We'll talk about children in care and stories from care. So you'll leave tonight with a little bit more of an understanding about some of those stories that bring children into care. We'll find out who can be a carer. Hopefully you'll find out you can. We'll answer a few more of our frequently asked questions that we get all the time. Then I'll answer any questions from the chat box. And then at the very end, we'll give you some ideas about how you can continue the conversation and take the next steps with us if you would like to. So that's the roadmap for this evening. I'm really excited. Let's get started. So firstly, who is Life Without Barriers? So we're a leading social purpose organisation and we work all across Australia, so in more than 440 communities. And we have a number of different programs that we work within. So we've got our Child, Youth and Families program, which is where foster care lives. We work with people with disabilities. We work with refugees and asylum seekers. And we work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as well. So that's just some of the work we do at Life Without Barriers across the country. What is foster care? Probably the most important question that we need to answer this evening. So foster care is for children who need to be away from their families for whatever reason, where they are placed into a safe and supportive home to heal and grow. So foster care might be for a night, it might be for a week, it might be for a year, or it might be for many years. At the heart of it, though, it's important for you to know that foster care is temporary care. And in the state of Victoria, the aim is to reunify families and keep them together where we can. Excuse me, little frog in my throat there. So we have nearly 50,000 children who are unable to live safely at home in Australia at any given time. And for that reason, of course, we're always looking for great foster carers. So where are more foster carers needed? Everywhere, all across Australia. So here are just some statistics around the number of carers that exist in each state around Australia. And you can see the grand old state of Victoria down the bottom here. There's around 1,500 children in foster care and a much higher number, nearly 7,000 children who are in kinship or relative care. So that's where they aren't able to live safely at home with mum and dad, but maybe they've been moved in with auntie or grandma or cousin or someone like that. So that's what kinship care refers to there. So that's a little bit of an insight into the fact foster carers are needed everywhere. Are there different care types? Yes, there are. And we're going to talk a little bit about those now. And there's much more information available about these if you progress through and want to find out some more. So in a nutshell, there's respite care, which is usually planned in advance, and this is where a child who's already living in a foster care placement with a foster care family longer term might come and stay with a respite carer for a weekend or a week of the school holidays, something like that. So it's anywhere up to 7 nights in a row, and it's usually planned in advance. And what's great about respite care is that it gives children in care an opportunity to mix in a different social network, to go to someone else's house, to eat some different food, and they really start to learn that, hey, there are lots of adults in the world who really care about me and want to keep me safe. That's what we love about respite care, and it gives our long-term carers a break. Right, next to respite care here, we've got emergency care, which is quite different to respite care. As the name suggests, it's often very urgent, immediate care is needed for a child because their safety is at risk. So emergency care in Victoria is anything up to 4 weeks at a time. And the call for emergency care can come at 3 in the morning, it might come at 3 in the afternoon, or it might come at any hour in between those. So if you are signing up to be an emergency carer, there is that expectation that you might have some flexibility around accepting a placement. Short-term care. So this is really anything up to 6 months. So short-term care, it typically exists while families are given an opportunity to sort out issues at home. So a child might have been removed for a specific issue, and the family is given an opportunity to really resolve that. So the child is kept safe in a foster care placement for up to 6 months, where they can be kept safe and feel stable and be nurtured, and keep those family relationships strong if that's safe and appropriate, so that when they are returned home in 6 months or so, they're able to do so safely. Then there's long-term care. So really that's anything that's 6 months and above. So long-term care is really, we ask for a commitment to support children toward adulthood and towards independence. And it's a long-term stability that we're looking for from long-term carers. Some children in long-term care are never expected to go back and live with their family full-time. And I say some because there's no guarantees. So long-term care is still not forever care. There are no guarantees of that in foster care. It is temporary care. So that's a little bit about the care types that we have here in Victoria. Of course, when it comes to fostering, no two children are the same, no two families are the same. So really it is a case-by-case basis where some children might need care for a few nights, others might need a really long-term placement. These are just some of the care types that we do offer here at Life Without Barriers. So what is the Life Without Barriers approach to foster care? So every day here at Life Without Barriers, we are guided by an evidence-informed approach called CARE. Isn't that nice that it's called CARE and it informs how we approach care, and it creates conditions for change? Now, it's developed by Cornell University, and it involves 5 days of training to kind of go through the care model. So I'm not going to talk you through every detail, but I will talk to you a little bit about the 6 principles that kind of underpin the care model. So it's about being relationship-based and recognizing that children need trusting and meaningful relationships with the adults who care for them. And that allows those children to build social and emotional confidence, which is excellent. It's developmentally focused, so really it's about challenging but not overwhelming children, meeting them where they're at so that we can help them to develop age appropriately. It's about being trauma informed, so always making sure that we are mindful of the impact that trauma has had on children, and as the adults in the relationship, modifying our own expectations and interactions accordingly. It's about being family involved, so recognizing that a child's identity is really strongly linked to the family that they've come from, to their community, and to their culture, and to making sure that just because they're in foster care, those links aren't jeopardized and we do keep them strong. It's about being competency centered, so making sure that we're focusing on giving children the skills for life that they need. So skills, knowledge, and attitudes that are actually going to help them to negotiate everyday life when they become adults. And it's about being ecologically oriented, or focusing on the environment and in making sure that it is a supportive place and there's helpful role models there that are actually showing children this is how it's done, this is how you be an adult in the world, so that they have something to aspire to for themselves. So that's a little bit about the care model. These are probably the questions we get a lot, and that's about the children that actually come into care. So I just want to point out the lovely Kieran here on the left-hand side of your screen. So Kieran grew up in foster care. He came into foster care at the age of 12 and he's now an adult. He has a full-time job. He's looking forward to buying a house. And I think it's worth pointing out that he also has a very cute dog. So that's important. And Kieran remembers that his foster carer played a really big part in who he is today. And I think that's what it's all about, isn't it? That kind of motivating and rewarding stuff that happens for foster carers. So there's lots of different reasons why children come into care. They come from all different cultures. They come from just about every suburb across Australia. So each child has a unique story and a unique set of circumstances, but what we can almost guarantee is that they've come from complex family and social situations where they've suffered neglect, trauma, and abuse. So children in care might be anywhere from 0 to 18 years of age. They come from all cultural backgrounds, and all of them do have families who are important to them. So it's important to know that you're not ever going to replace the biological family of a child in care. Children in care have all suffered trauma of some sort. So being removed from your family of birth is traumatizing. Children may have been physically, emotionally, or sexually abused themselves, or they might have witnessed horrible things happening to the people they love in their home. So things like domestic violence. And many of the children that we see coming into care have been neglected as well. So they haven't been given that care and support and supervision that they need to develop and grow age appropriately. So sometimes we can see children who might be, 6 years old on paper, but they might be functioning at the capacity of sort of a 3 or 4 year old. So that's a little bit about children in care. So knowing all of those things, clearly we need carers with attributes and beliefs that we know are good for children so that we can help them grow and develop and heal. So here are some of the stories of some of our carers and young people across Life Without Barriers. So this is Gary and Shell. They're some of our Tasmanian carers, and they provide long-term care for children aged 6 to 11. So Gary and Shell have their own children who are now grown up. They live on a farm, so they have lots of animals, and right now they have 5 children in their care. So they have 5 brothers and sisters all living together with Gary and Shell, which is just amazing that those brothers and sisters are able to continue living together. Fantastic story. Then we move over to Stacey, who's a young person who grew up in foster care and is now studying at university, and she is going to become a social worker, which is really exciting, just like me. And Stacey talks about how important it was to her that her foster family made her feel part of their family, which is really lovely. Then we have Belinda over here on the right, and Belinda provides a number of different care types for 5 to 18-year-olds. So Belinda is a single carer and she works full-time in a very demanding corporate role, but she still makes it work. So she still manages to be a foster carer. She started off providing things like respite and emergency care, and then she moved into providing some other care types like short-term. And you'll see that there's a little read more arrow underneath all of our stories. That's because all of them are actually available for you to read the full story on our Life Without Barriers website. So I encourage you to go and have a look and read the stories of our carers and young people there. So let's talk a little bit about who can be a carer. The exciting news is that it's likely that you can. So carers come from all sorts of different backgrounds. They might be married, single, living together, divorced. Really, what matters to us is that you are able to care for and nurture a child and keep them safe. That's really what we're looking for. So there are a couple of eligibility requirements that we do need you to meet. So you must be aged over 21 and you do need to have relevant life experience. So you need to have met and interacted with a number of children and have a basic understanding of what childcare actually involves, for example. That's important life experience. You do need to be well and healthy. One thing we know is that providing foster care can be quite demanding, and so it is really important that you are well and healthy and able to keep up with those demands. You do need to have a regular source of income in your household already. You can't be relying on the very small care allowance that foster care provides to keep your household going. You might be from any cultural background. You might be single, you might be in a relationship. And you do need to be willing to undergo background checks as well. So things like police checks, working with children checks, and all of that jazz, because that's a really important part of how we make sure that we're keeping children safe in care. There's a few things about your home and your family, a few requirements that we need to meet there. Excuse me. So you might have children or not. That's totally fine. You might rent, you might own. That's all good as well. What you do need to have is a spare room in your home, and you do need to have a car and a license, or access to car and someone in your home who does have a license and is able to drive. The other thing we need to see is that everyone in your household is willing to participate in the assessment process. So we don't assess individuals in a household, we do assess a whole household to make sure that it's a safe and suitable place for a foster child to be placed. So hopefully that all makes sense for you. We're going to jump now into having a bit of a look at some frequently asked questions that we do receive. And once I've moved through all of these, I will come to all of your questions that we've received this evening in the chat box. So let me start with some frequently asked questions about you. So we get this one all the time. I'm single, can I foster? And it's an absolute yes, you can. So across Australia, about half of our foster carers are single. So there's absolutely no problem with single foster carers because, as it says here, families come in all shapes and sizes, and foster families do too. So absolutely you can foster if you're single. Same here, if you're a same-sex couple, you can absolutely foster. So you might be single, married, you might be in a de facto relationship, and you might identify as any number of sexualities. What's really important to us is that you're able to provide a stable, loving home to children and young people and keep them safe. Again, that's what the bottom line is for us. Can I foster if I'm not a parent? Is a frequent question we do receive. So of course you can. So throughout the assessment process, if you do choose to proceed, we look at the skills that you already have in terms of taking care of children. We look at some things that you might need to work on developing and doing better. And from that assessment process, we also make recommendations about what ages and needs level of children would be best suited to you and your household. And the skills that you do have. So that's how it kind of works. But no, you do not have to be a parent in order to be a foster carer. There's a little list here, which I love, about all the different things that great foster carers have. So patience, understanding, acceptance, commitment, flexibility, that's an important one, time to give, and a commitment to maintaining and strengthening family relationships. So nowhere on that list does it say you have to be a particular sexuality or any of those other things, or that you need to be married or own your own home. Really, it's about the characteristics that we're looking for and what kind of a person that you are and how safe you could keep a child. That's what it's about. So a little bit about your home. Do I need to have a spare room? Yes, you do. And that is not a Life Without Barriers rule. That is a government rule. So that's the department that we work with. That's one of the legislative requirements that we do need to meet for foster children. The reason we ask that you have a spare room for the child to live in is that the child can feel safe and secure in your home and family, and that they have a place to belong in your home. Do I have to own my own home to be a foster carer? No, you do not. I'm a millennial and the dream of owning my own home one day grows ever the more distant by the day. So we'd run out of foster carers if that was a rule. You do not need to own your own home. You might rent, you might be in public housing, you might own your own home, or you might be paying off a mortgage. You might have an apartment, you might have a house with a big backyard. It's neither here nor there for us. All that we ask is that you're able to show us that you have safe and suitable housing to foster a child in. And there's also just a little note there that we like to make that if you do rent or you are in public housing, you might need to seek approval or permission to have extra people in your home, such as a foster child. And that would be your responsibility to follow up, because unfortunately we just don't have the capacity to follow up with everyone's landlord. So that's just a little bit about your home. Some questions we get about your family. Can I have my own children and foster other children? Yes, absolutely you can. So again, your family situation is considered when we go in and do that assessment, and we make decisions about the age and needs level of children that you might foster. So here at Life Without Barriers, our placement principle is that we place children in your care who are younger than your youngest child. So if you have a 7-year-old, we're not going to show up at your house with 16-year-old triplets and be like, there you go, make that work. We really want the children, the biological children in your home, to be the elder siblings, the older foster siblings, where possible, unless there's some exceptions to that rule because there's exceptional circumstances. And what we found and what research tells us is that that generally works best for placements. So your children do need to be old enough to kind of indicate to you or tell you if a placement isn't working for them. So if you have really young children who aren't able to do that yet, they're not at that age, then we'll probably suggest to you that you postpone your application for a few years and come back to us. But please ask any of those questions, and we're always happy to answer them. Will all my family be involved in the assessment process? Yes, they will. So everyone in your household needs to take part in the assessment process to varying degrees. So there's lots of different aspects to that assessment. So there's things like police checks, working with children checks for adults, medical checks, and we do some reference checks as well. And we also come into the home and have discussions and interviews as well. And that's with yourself and with household members and your own biological children as well. So our assessors might ask your household members or your children how they feel about a child coming to live in the home and it being a fostering home, how they feel about sharing their toys with another child, how they feel about sharing mummy and daddy's time with another child. We might ask them about the routines and consequences and discipline that they have that are used in your home. And please don't feel that we're going to come in and do a Spanish Inquisition with your very young children. We recognise that asking those kinds of questions might be a bit difficult for young children, and so we might ask them to draw pictures instead to communicate with us. We had an assessment recently where the assessor had the child of the household build Lego to do his assessment component, so that was really lovely. Basically, the reason that we want to come in and talk to everyone in the household is to make sure that everyone in your home is prepared for the significant change that foster care does bring. So we have a duty of care not just to the children that we might place with you, but also to everyone living in your home to make sure it's going to be a safe decision to proceed. So some questions we get about the child in care. So how are children actually matched to foster carers? This is a really good question. We complete, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, a thorough assessment of yourself and your family and your household and make some decisions about what needs level, what ages of children might work best in your family and kind of marry up with your confidence and your skills and comfort levels. Then when we receive information about a child who needs a placement, we look at all of the information that we have about that child. We look at all of the information that we have about all of our available carer households, and we make a decision about which is the most compatible match. So it's not a case of, just putting whoever in whichever home. We really think carefully about what's likely to be a successful placement match before we make a placement. So can I choose the age and gender of the child is a question we do sometimes get. So, through that assessment process that I do keep mentioning, we do discover which age and maybe which gender of a child might work best in your family. Some people that we assess are really open to all ages and all genders, but others, sometimes because of their own life experiences, might have really specific ideas about what ages and genders might work. And we always take your wishes into account. We really hear you in that, and that forms the basis of our recommendations. I suppose where it can get tricky is if you have really strict preferences and you're quite rigid in those. So if you're coming through and you're saying, yeah, really, we only want to care for a child who's aged between 5 and 5.5, and they need to be a girl and they need to have blonde hair, we might sort of think, okay, we're probably not going to be able to find very many placements for you, and we need to make a decision about whether it's worth our while to proceed if you're really set on that kind of strict and rigid idea. Really, all we ask for is some flexibility, but your wishes are absolutely taken into account throughout that process. Some more questions about the child in care. This one often surprises people when they come to learn about foster care. Do children in care have ongoing relationships with their biological family? The answer is they absolutely do, where it's safe and appropriate, because the parents and families of children in care love those kids and they want them to do well. And they also often have lots of really important information about the children that it's important for the child's care team and their foster carers to know. So as a foster carer, it's really important that you are able to support those positive and ongoing relationships between children in care and their biological family members. It is actually a very important part of the foster carer role. Please feel free to ask us questions if you do have concerns about that, and it's something that you want to learn more about throughout the process before you decide to proceed onward. So what happens if the placement isn't working out? Really great question. So obviously what we don't want is for children to come into foster care and be put in 10 different placements in 10 different days because the carers go, nah, I don't like it, it's not working. That's not what we want at all, because children will often blame themselves if placements don't work out. So you'll have a care team wrapped around you, and all we really ask is that you communicate really clearly about any issues that might be coming up so that we can try and resolve them as early as possible. But basically, at the end of the day, if a placement is going disastrously badly, it's just not working, all we want to do is find a solution that works for you and your family and also for the child as well. And often that just involves us having enough of a heads up that there are issues so that we can start some planning and getting some solutions in place. So some questions about the process of becoming a foster carer. This is probably the most common question we get. How long does it take? The sad news is, if you're thinking that you're here with me on a Wednesday evening and you're going to have a child in your home by Monday, you are sadly mistaken. It is a much bigger and more robust process than that. So if you're thinking about fostering, you're going to have lots of questions, we're going to have lots of questions, and we really have to flesh those out and do our due diligence to make sure that it's a good and safe idea for you. The application and assessment process takes about 4 months. And I say about 4 months, that's with everything going well. So if you go away on a 1-month holiday during that time, that's obviously going to push the time frame out a little bit and things like that. So 4 months is sort of everything going well. What are the 6 stages of the assessment process? So let's have a bit of an overview of what the assessment process that I keep bringing up actually involves. So there's 6 stages in a nutshell. There's you making an inquiry and saying, hello, I'd like to learn more about foster care, please. So you're kind of in that stage now because you're here with us this evening. And that's where really you decide if being a carer is right for you and you do want to proceed to an application. Then there's a home visit that happens in your home. And at the moment, that might look a little bit more like this. So it might be done via Zoom or it might be done in person. Then you complete lots of paperwork. There's always paperwork in foster care. Then you book into training. This is probably the most exciting part. The training is fantastic that we provide to people who want to be foster carers. So it really answers a lot more of those questions and provides you a lot of that information that you really need to know in kind of becoming a carer. So what to do, what not to do, all of those big questions that you probably have, that's what that training really looks to answer for you. And by the end of the training, I think people normally have a pretty solid idea about whether they're really keen to go through with this or not. So that's fantastic. Then there's the assessment process. And this is really where you sit down with an assessor and they talk at length with you and with your family and household members and nut out all of those issues. And from that, generate recommendations about the care types and ages and needs levels of children that you should care for. And then the exciting part, approval. And that's where you become a foster carer at the end of this big long process. So it's not, as simple and straightforward a process, but the reason is we do have to really do our due diligence and make sure that we're keeping children at the end of the process safe. So if you do go through that big long process and become a foster carer, what support can you expect to receive? So please know that you're never alone as a foster carer. At Life Without Barriers, we really take that seriously, that we're here to support our carers, because foster care is tricky. It's difficult. It can be really challenging for foster carers to understand what's happened to these children and to take care of them. And so it's really important that carers feel supported and confident in their role. So this is some of the forms of support that you can expect to receive as a carer. So training before you become a carer, but also after you're accredited, there's more opportunities to keep upskilling and keep learning. And 24/7 on-call support. So at any time of the day or night, if anything pops up during placement, there's always someone at the end of the phone that you can call. There is a little bit of financial support. And as I mentioned before, foster care is not a get-rich-quick scheme by any stretch of the imagination. Foster carers in Victoria receive what's called a carer allowance, which basically just contributes to the day-to-day living costs of children. So things like food and clothing, that's what that carer allowance would contribute towards. There is specialist support, so things like children's clinicians to really help you nut out any issues that might pop up in your placements. If you are doing full-time care, you have access to respite. So if you need to go away for the weekend, you know and can feel safe that the child is going to go and stay with some foster carers for respite who's been through exactly the same process that you have. So they're going to be a safe and suitable person, which is great. And there's also care and networking opportunities. So obviously last year during COVID, we had to abandon in-person opportunities and we did things like trivia nights and whatnot online on Zoom. We're very excited to be back and doing some of those opportunities in person again this year. And we do really encourage carers to form relationships, supportive peer-to-peer relationships with other carers, because often that's the best kind of support for our carers to receive. So that's some of the support that you can expect to receive as a carer. So it's that fun time of the evening where I'm going to come to the chat box and have a bit of a look at the questions that you've been sending through. I can see that it's been blinking, so I know there are some in there. I'm going to throw to you, Lou, if you can let me know if there's some questions I need to answer.
Absolutely. Some of them you have already covered, Hannah, as you've gone through. One question was, is there a financial assistance, like education costs? Who pays that?
Yes, so that's a really good question. And as I've just sort of spoken about there with the carer allowance, you do receive a little bit of money to kind of contribute towards those day-to-day costs for a child. If there is a cost that does pop up that you think, oh my goodness, we weren't expecting that, there's always the opportunity to kind of reach out and ask Child Protection or ourselves to part fund or to fund that cost as well. So it's not as though you just kind of receive that allowance and that's all. There's other opportunities available, but really it is for those one-off costs. So hopefully that answers your question, that there is a bit of a carer allowance available for you.
Okay, and another one, Hannah. If the family home is unsafe, why reunify?
Such a great question, and it is one that we do hear. I suppose at the very bottom line is, if the family home remains unsafe, we don't reunify. So there are lots of assessments and lots of work goes into making sure that that family home is actually safe for the child to go back to before that reunification takes place. And that's why foster carers are needed, so that the child can be kept safe in a different environment. Work can be done to assess that home environment, the biological home environment, and then the reunification takes place if an assessment's made that it's safe to do so. That's in a nutshell. There's probably a whole 2-hour webinar that we could run about that exact question. So it is a great one. Hopefully that gives you enough information for now, and you can ask some more questions later.
Okay, the next one, Hannah, was around types of care. And can you choose more than one type?
Yes, great question. Yes, it's not kind of a checkbox where we say, no, you can only pick one. Definitely, if you want to come in and say, I'm actually comfortable with all of the care types, that might be, fantastic. We might celebrate with that. So absolutely, you can do more than one care type.
Excellent. And another good question, have the children been given counselling and are foster carers alerted to that?
Have the children been given counselling? So yeah, quite often because of the things that they've been through and the experiences they have had, children might be engaged with supports like counselling or a psychologist or whatnot. And yes, it's absolutely important to us that foster carers are made aware of any supports that the child is receiving. So yes,
Okay.
quite often.
And one, if your BMI is not normal, but otherwise meets all criteria, will that affect my eligibility?
I think that means body mass index.
Yeah.
So weight. Forgive me, I'm not great with the anagrams, but no, look, what we ask for is more of a general kind of medical check. So the way that the health and medical check works in foster care is we provide you a self checklist. So you kind of sign off and say, nope, I'm not on medications, or I don't have any of these issues, or maybe you disclose some things that you do have. Then we get your GP to sign off on a medical check as well. It's really basic. It's not, you don't have to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars and go and get a full medical. It is kind of just a check of your medical records from your regular GP that we ask for. But really, it's not about us finding reasons to count you out. Why we do a medical is to make sure that you are well and healthy, you have that baseline health. But also, if you do have any kind of niggles or other things, that we're aware of them and that we can place appropriately with you. So if you have a really bad back, for example, and lifting up really small children is not a good idea for you, that's important information for us to know. And we'll always talk with you about that during the assessment.
And the next one. If you were to foster siblings, do you need to have 2 spare rooms or may siblings share?
Great question. I might even add that to the presentation because it's such a great question. Siblings are at times approved to share a room. It really depends on the siblings. It's such a case-by-case basis, but if it's safe and it's appropriate, then absolutely they will approve siblings to share a room. And in that instance, you only need that 1 spare room in order to have 2 children placed with you. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, and the next one you've covered, what support do you provide? You've done, this one's a nice one. Can you have animals?
Oh, can you have pets in your home and then foster children? Yes, you can be a parent or a fur parent and be a foster carer. So something that often children in care don't get to have opportunities to do is sometimes they've never had a pet before. So if you have a pet in your home and they come in and they go, I love dogs or I love cats, and you've got one there, that can be a really lovely experience for children. Sometimes, just to flag it at the opposite end of the spectrum, some children might be really fearful or afraid of animals. And so it's always a really good thing to ask when you're talking about placement. So these children fans of animals? Because I do have my dog and my cat. So yes, absolutely you can have pets. We're big pet lovers here.
Excellent. After assessment, can the types of care that carers provide change? As in, if we were originally able to provide emergency care, in the future would be able to start providing respite care at a later stage?
Yeah, so it's always, we don't just accredit you for X and Y care type and that's all, and we never talk about it again. So as your lives change and your circumstances change, it's likely that your care types might change as well. So we'll always be open to having those conversations with you. And as someone else just asked before, you can provide all care types or a couple of different care types, and be open to receiving all of those placements at once. So yeah, it's always an ongoing conversation, but absolutely it can be changed after you've been approved.
Do most children return to their homes?
Yes, so overwhelmingly in Victoria, that's always what we hope to do. We've seen some beautiful success stories of that here at LWB, where children have gone back and they're reunited with biological family and they kind of live happily ever after. Sometimes that doesn't happen and children remain in foster care until they do sort of turn 18. So it really is a case-by-case basis, and I've seen examples of both happening.
Excellent. Will my parents and extended family on both sides, who I see regular and would be having contact with our foster children, will you involve them in the assessment process?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's actually okay for me to fully integrate the foster children into my family life?
Yeah, beautiful question. Love that that's what you're already thinking about. So, what we want for children in care is to be made a member of our foster carers' families. So, if you have a big extended family and you want that foster child to be a part of that, that's fantastic. And absolutely, we will always encourage that. I suppose the word of warning that we'd give is that sometimes children in care, because of their trauma experiences, might be a little bit overwhelmed by trying to do that really early in the placement. So it may be that there's a settling period of a couple of months where maybe you don't have lots of family around, and then you do those introductions over time as the child warms up and settles in and feels a bit more open to that. And would they be involved in the assessment process? If you're flagging that you have some family members who are in your home quite regularly, it's likely that we'll reach out and have a conversation with them about your application to foster. And we can also, if you think you'll be relying on different family members for things like babysitting, we can do some probity checks like police checks and whatnot for them as well, so that you can involve them in caring for the child too. And we can even train them as well. We love family. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay. Now the next one goes to the start when you had the maps at the beginning, Hannah, compared to the other states. And I think what they're asking is why VIC had such different proportions, foster versus kinship family care.
Who is a detective in here? Fantastic question and great attention to detail, I must say. But it's a really good question and it's a pretty simple answer. And that's because in Victoria, there is a real focus on keeping children within their biological families where possible. So we're more likely in our state to place a child with grandma or with auntie or with cousin or with sister or brother or whatnot and keep them in what we call a kinship placement than to put them into foster care in the first instance. So really foster care is kind of more at the end of the line. And that's why our figures are a little bit different. So we have a higher number of children in kinship and relative care than we do foster care, significantly higher. And the stats look a little bit different in other states. That's, again, one of those very in a nutshell responses. So hopefully that gives you enough to go on.
Next one, would we be legal guardians, as in meaning a schools, doctors, etc.?
And I can hear we were saying we love pets before. That was Lou's doggy.
Sorry, yeah, I know. Oh my God.
He wants to answer some questions. So would we be the guardian? So the answer to that is no. So in the state of Victoria, as I mentioned at the very start of the presentation, foster care is temporary care. So you do not become the guardian of the child in foster care. What's more often the case is that the department is the guardian. And so they are legally responsible for signing off on consent forms for the bigger ticket items. I don't want anyone to get fearful hearing that answer though, because as a foster carer, you are given what's called an authorization to make sort of day-to-day decisions. So you won't be in a situation where, you know, you're waiting on that kind of consent to come from the department for, you know, day-to-day things. So there's a bit of a shared approach. Hopefully that answers your question, but the kind of baseline one is that no, you don't become the guardian of the child in Victoria as a foster carer.
The next one's a great one. When will you get in touch with us to start the process?
Oh, who is asking these wonderful questions? Are there any more questions after that one, Lou? Because if not, I'll use that as my segue to my next slide.
No, yeah, there is 4 more.
Yep, okay. We'll just answer a few more questions and then I will tell you exactly how we can get on with the chat.
Okay, if the child comes from a domestic violence situation, do the parents know where the child is being fostered? And do these parents get access to the child during the foster care?
Oh, that's a very specific scenario question and one that I probably wouldn't want to answer in this context, only because, like I said before, every case is so different. So I wouldn't want to be saying, oh, yes, or oh, no, when really that really is a case-by-case basis. I suppose what I can say as a general response to that is there are always decisions made about safety first in the child protection space. So if there is the possibility of harm to our carers or to the child, that would be mitigated and minimised with lots of planning. So I hope that sort of gives you enough to go on, but yeah, I can't really speak to very specific scenarios, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the next one was very similar, Hannah. Would the parents of the children know where you live?
Again, really good question. And again, those questions are made based on safety first, and your comfort level, and you're being consulted. So hard for me to give a definite answer, but absolutely safety is taken into consideration when making those decisions, and probably not is really the answer. Yep.
Yeah. And the last one, do extended family that visit on a regular basis always go through the process also?
Oh, so if you have, grandma, grandpa or whatnot, and they come and visit regularly, will they go through the process? They will be involved in the assessment process, or we might ask about the regularity of those visits, or maybe before they come and visit, we might want to have a conversation with them. And certainly we would want to do probity checks if they're staying in the home overnight. That's something that we're required to do. So absolutely, we would involve them a little bit, but we wouldn't want to make it prohibitive. So we always want to kind of accredit you, and then we can work those things out and make sure that regular visitors are safety screened in the process. So
I have one more also.
Yep.
Foster carers that do respite, if they wanted to go away, can the foster carers take them away with them?
Oh, I love that question. Yes. So if you're doing full-time care for a child and they've been in placement with you for a while, and you every year go on a holiday to Queensland, or you go on a holiday to Phillip Island or something like that, and you want to take the child with you, we would want to support that if it was safe and appropriate for that child. And so we would advocate to get the necessary permissions in place to make sure you were able to do that. So it's not a definite, but we want children to have those opportunities and experiences with you. So we would support and try and make that happen for you. Absolutely. But I love that that's where your mind is at already. So really good question. And is that the last question in there, Lou?
That is it. Some great questions.
Some really good ones. So thank you all for those questions. We really, really appreciate them, and they do get our heads ticking as well. So we thank you very much. And it shows you've been listening, which is exciting for me. So to throw back a couple of questions, when someone asks, well, how do we continue the conversation? Here's how. So there's a couple of different options here for you. You might go to our website to have a look at some of those stories that I was talking about before and to find out other information. You might take a quick second to fill in what's called a call me back form. So Lou is just going to copy and paste the link for this form into the chat box. And I promise you it takes like 10 seconds to fill in some very basic information, and it gets fired off into our system, and one of our team will give you a call in the next couple of days to continue the conversation. So I think Lou's just copying and pasting that one in now. Trying, I can see her typing, so it should pop up very shortly. I think you need to select the all panelists and attendees there, Lou, and just type it in. There we go. Hopefully you all saw that one pop up. It's just that little link that Louise has just pasted in. So do feel free to click on that. It's a very quick process, and you can fill that form in, and we will give you a call in the next couple of days. If you are a personality type like me, you might be too impatient to wait. So you might want to call us or send us an email, and you're very welcome to do that. So you can contact us on this number or this email address, and those details are available on our website as well. So I just want to shout out, I've just opened the chat box, and there is a little good news story in there, which I love. So someone who's joined us this evening, when she was 14, she had a foster brother, and he stayed with her and her family from the age of 15 to 24. And now he's 29. He's doing well. He works for government. So thank you for sharing that. We love hearing the good news stories and the warm and fuzzies from foster care. So that's what it's all about. So that's really it from us tonight, everyone. That's the end of the presentation, and I'm glad that one of our participants shared that story, because that's what we end on, is this slide here. And this is Stacey, who's one of our former foster care clients, and she is now grown up and she remembers that without her carer, she wouldn't be where she is today. And I think that's what it's all about, that difference that you can make in the life of a child or children. And we're very grateful that you've taken time out of your evening to take a step towards making that difference tonight. So thank you all very much.
Yeah,
we hope we answered all of your questions. And thank you to Lou for being such a wonderful offsider. So thank you, and we hope to continue the conversation with you all soon. Thanks all.